You know, the late 70s were a very interesting time in music as many genres kind of mashed together and were even played side by side on pop radio stations. Well, today we're going to zoom into 1978 through 1979, a period where disco kind of infiltrated rock and roll, for better or worse. I have 5 examples coming up next on Music Meanderings. It's Music Meanderings. I'm Mike Lamneck, and thanks for tuning in. Be sure to comment and subscribe below to keep this channel going. We would certainly appreciate that. Well, disco music as a genre, it started earlier than I really realized. It was starting up in the late 60s. It wasn't until about the mid-70s, though, that it really grabbed hold in America with bands like ABBA, of course, the Bee Gees, Donna Summer, Gloria Gaynor, Giorgio Moroder, the Village People, many more acts on the disco scene in the mid to late 70s. By the late 70s, most major U.S. cities had a pretty vibrant disco club scene going on, and DJs would mix dance records at clubs such as the famous Studio 54 in Manhattan, and that was a venue popular among celebrities. We'll talk more about that coming up. Films such as Saturday Night Fever, of course, in 1977, and Thank God It's Friday in 1978, kind of contributed to the mainstream popularity of disco. It began to see its decline, though, in late 79 as the infamous Disco Demolition event took place at Comiskey Park in Chicago on July 12th of that year, and that ended in a riot. At the end of the event, a crate filled with disco records was blown up in the center of the field. Unfortunately, a riot ensued after that. The field was all torn up due to the rioters and also the explosion, and they had to forfeit the ball game, so it didn't really work out for them all that well. Now, many artists at the time were dabbling in disco and dance rhythms, like Elton John with Philadelphia Freedom, David Bowie's funky hit Fame, Paul McCartney and Wings with Goodnight Tonight, of course, Queen's another one, Bites the Dust. Now, here's 5 examples, all coming from the years 1978 and 1979 that kind of shook things up. Originally released on their 1979 album Dynasty, it was the first single from that Kiss album. Paul Stanley of Kiss says the idea came to him one night at, yes, Studio 54, while listening to that constant pounding 124 beat per minute beat over and over. He wondered if he could craft a song for Kiss that would incorporate those elements, and he figured if he could, it'd be a big hit. And the record company at that time was kind of putting pressure on Kiss to be more commercial and get a hit single. So it came at the right time. So Paul Stanley solicited the help of a couple of top songwriters, came up with Yes, I Was Made for Loving You. And it's been a polarizing Kiss song ever since. Gene Simmons has been outspoken in his dislike for the song, but he concedes it's one they always had to include in the set because of its popularity and infectious sing-along chorus. Known primarily as a new wave rock band that emerged from the New York CBGB scene, Blondie exploded onto the scene with their third album. First albums, they did all right, but the third album really broke it for them. 1978's Parallel Lines, featuring the disco classic Heart of Glass. The first single from that album, released in January 1979, reached number 1 on the charts in several countries, including the U.S. Billboard Hot 100 and the U.K. Singles Chart. The song was even included into the Grammy Hall of Fame. Rolling Stone magazine ranked it as number 255 on its list of 500 greatest songs of all time, and Billboard magazine ranked Heart of Glass number 47 in their list of 500 best pop songs of all time. Blondie singer Debbie Harry has said that Heart of Glass is one of her favorite songs that she's ever written. Do You Think I'm Sexy? One of probably the most infamous examples of a rocker performing a disco hit. And did you know that it was really done as a spoof on disco? One of the co-writers of the song, Dwayne Hitchings, says that they were inspired by the disco lounge duo of Steve Martin and Dan Aykroyd, the two wild and crazy guys, right, from Saturday Night Live. And that is kind of where the idea came from. Joke or not, the song was released as the first single from Rod Stewart's Blondes Have More Fun album in November 1978, spent 1 week atop the charts in the UK and 4 weeks at the top spot on the US Billboard Hot 100. In fact, Billboard ranked it number 4 on its top singles of the 1979 year-end chart. The song, of course, was criticized by many in the rock press as a portrayal of Stewart's blues-oriented rock. And another disco hit by a rock band from the late 70s, perhaps the most popular one that we'll talk about today, maybe, Rolling Stones and Miss You, written by Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. Released in May 1978 as the first single, it came out 1 month in advance of their album Some Girls, and it peaked at number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100, went to number 3 on the UK singles chart, and an extended special disco version, which, by the way, I used to own, which I still have that. It was released as the band's first dance remix on a 12-inch single. Now, the origin of the song is up for debate, as Mick Jagger and Ronnie Wood with the Stones insist that Miss You wasn't originally conceived as a disco song. However, Keith Richards says the song is a great disco record and it was calculated to be one. Now, as other songs on the list, Miss You, of course, was heavily influenced by the band members hanging out at disco clubs. For the bass part, Bill Wyman says he started from the bass guitar on the song demo and then went to quite a few clubs to get the classic bass line figured out. And one more on our survey of when rock went disco, 1978, 1979. And in fact, they arguably released a whole disco album. That's Electric Light Orchestra. Now, the album they released in 1979 was called Discovery. However, keyboardist Richard Tandy said he called it Disco Very. Not sure if the band intended it to be a play on words or not, but it did have a very disco tinge to most of it. Shine a Little Love was the first track on the album, and it did really well. In fact, it was one of the band's most commercially successful singles, peaking at number 4 in Canada, number 6 on the UK singles chart, and number 8 in the US Billboard 100. 12-inch release also available on white vinyl. In fact, if you would like that, it is still available on Discogs today for a reasonable price. No, I'm not sponsored by Discogs. ELO songwriter Jeff Lynne says of the song, a bit of disco beat in this one, quite a lot of things going on, 40-piece string section and all. He says it's very jolly and bouncy, and I must have been in a very good mood when I wrote it. I'm sure he was in a very good mood when the royalties started coming in for Shine a Little Love from the Electric Light Orchestra. Is it Disco Very or Discovery album title? I'm Mike Lamneck, Music Meanderings. Thanks for joining us. Please be sure to comment and subscribe below, and we'll talk to you again soon.